going to be talking about a subject that is actually kind of close to my heart. Deeply close. And it's called, the event that happened was called the Dancing Plague of 1518. It happened in Strasbourg, and I'll get straight into it. Okay. On a cold night in 1518, a young lady named Frau Troppier walked out into the street amongst the steeples and the grates and the doors and the cats, and she began to dance. She continued to dance, and for many, many hours she just kept going. And she danced and she danced and she danced, and after about 6 days, people started to pay attention and consider that she might have a problem. She kept going. She was joined by, I think it was about apparently 400 people within a month. So 1 month later, she was still going. She wasn't doing too well. People started suffering. They started dying of starvation, thirst. They were convulsing on the floor. They were having generally quite a bad time. This is a drawing of the event. A photograph of the event. And, yeah, it's. I think that's meant to be the Frau right there. So yeah, looking all right over there, doing well. I don't know what that dude's doing. Unaffected. One of the few who wasn't affected by the dancing plague. All right. For some weird reason, the plague affected nuns a lot more than other people in society. There's a few reasons for this, so I'll go into them because they have a lot to do with the causal factors of the dancing plague. But I have a list here of some of the afflictions that the nuns suffered. Pretty amazing. The nuns were making lewd gestures, racing around like dogs, jumping out of trees as imitation birds, meowing and clawing their way up tree trunks. They sexually propositioned priests, screamed, convulsed, and confessed to having carnal relations with devils or Christ. Or. Yeah, they don't really specify which one. Okay. How do we know this happened? Well, there's actually quite a shitload of evidence to suggest that this actually did happen. Physician notes, cathedral sermons, local chronicles, regional chronicles, Strasbourg City Council notes. It's pretty much confirmed. There's a lot of evidence from many different sources to state that this really did happen. But that's a history thing, so I don't really know about it. So, yeah. Okay. If this happened in a town, I mean, how would you cure it? I mean, what would you do to help the people who are all stuck in the dancing mode? I think the physicians thought the thing that I'm sure like we would all think if we were faced with this situation, and that's bloodletting. I had a lot of pictures to choose from. The reason I chose this picture is because it's kind of spurting out in this amazing little fountain. He's pretty chilled out about it as well, and I'm not sure what's going on there, but I don't really want to know.
Is it actually one of the dancers?
No, although he's pretty muscular, so I think he would have done well. But, you know, bloodletting was one of the things that was considered to be a possibility. Thankfully, they decided against it. And, yeah, you can see the next slide. This is the cure they settled on. They decided that more dancing was the best approach. It wasn't just more dancing that they decided on. What they actually did was the logic that they had was that if they make people dance harder and faster, that they would be cured quicker. So they organised a set of like special halls to let these people have their little dance sessions. They hired musicians and singers and guitarists and things like that to kind of play like fast-paced music, and hundreds of people died. Alright, so what actually caused it? It's a really interesting question. Ergo is this form of LSD. It's like naturally occurring. Has anyone heard of it before? It's been used in some paganistic cultures, I think, in the past. It was originally proposed as a possible reason for all these people kind of losing their shit and dancing like motherfuckers. But ergo gives you visions, and it doesn't make you energetic, it doesn't make you dance. And this is an example of a painting that was done by Hieronymus Bosch whilst he was high on this stuff. But yeah, he wasn't getting his groove on, so you could say it probably wasn't ergo. Mass psychogenic illness is probably the most likely cause, and we can have a look at kind of why it's the most likely cause. Don't worry about reading that. It's basically something that has a manifestation in behaviour but doesn't really have any kind of physiological etiology. So there's no kind of like toxic emission or physiological input that's causing people to freak out and perform a certain behaviour. Okay, so that. Okay, so some other instances of psychogenic illness. There was the Tanganyika laughing epidemic of 1962. A few girls at a mission near a lake developed a compulsion to laugh and cry by turns. They actually fixed it using quite a logical approach, which was to sacrifice a goat, and that worked pretty well, so that was fine. What else we have? The June bug outbreak of 1962. This was quite good. A mysterious disease kind of broke into this dressmaking department, and people thought they were being bitten by bugs. They got in the state health department. This was in the US, and no bugs were ever found. There was no possible physical cause of this illness, and it just kind of faded after a while. The symptoms, of course, throughout a lot of these things are quite common, except for laughing and dancing. That's probably not common to all of them. The Blackburn swooning school girls in 1965.
Was there a Beatles tour?
Yes. Several schoolgirls complained of dizziness initially, and it just caught on, and just hundreds of schoolgirls started swooning and fainting. And again, they called in the authorities, and again, no physicians or doctors could find any possible physiological cause for this. It just spread throughout this kind of very enclosed group of people. And I suppose something else to keep in mind, all of these people are segregated groups. We'll get to that in a second. The suggested nuns of the 17th century. So I mentioned these guys before. They actually came up with quite a good solution for this one as well. They beheaded a witch, which fixed it, which really genuinely fixed it in some sort of cases. It's Lindsay Lohan. Shrinking penis epidemic of 1967. It's a cheap shot, but he seems to like those. This phenomenon is quite amazing. It's called Koro. It happens a lot in Southeast Asia, and I have to read to you some of the features of this particular form of mass psychogenic illness. They're struck by epidemics of fear among men and women that their genitals are shrinking into their bodies. It's fueled by a belief in the existence of an evil spirit that causes genital retraction, and death is said to ensue once the penis, nipples, or vulva have fully disappeared into the body. Again, logical solution, exorcism, so that tends to cure people. The most glorious fact about this entire thing is that in Nigeria in 2001, at least 14 suspected penis thieves were killed. So, not arrested, killed, so yeah, they won't be stealing any more penises. Right. Causal factors, these are kind of common to every single instance of mass psychogenic illness. Cultural issues, not sure how the penis thing ties into that. And everything else works fine. Psychological stress is a big one that happens in almost all of these instances. Pre-existing beliefs, fears and superstitions, very, very common. Expectations, so if people have that kind of primed confirmation bias for what they're about to see, then they are more likely to believe it. Segregated groups, that is a really, really important one. They have to be segregated from many different forms of media and they have to be physically quite far away from other places. Alright. This all says a lot of really, really interesting stuff about the human mind. We like to imagine ourselves as being completely logical, but we're not always logical. In fact, we can suffer genuine symptoms even though the causes don't actually exist. And I think that's a really, really important thing to say. There's several factors which make you more likely to be susceptible to mass psychogenic illness, but the fact is, every single person can suffer it. So, actually, on a side note, on Wikipedia, there were a lot of instances of phrases that said there's a preponderance of women in occurrences of mass psychogenic illness, but I couldn't find anything to back it up. So, but it also said that people who are, it doesn't matter whether you're educated or uneducated, you can also suffer from mass psychogenic illness. So, obviously, whoever was editing Wikipedia hates women and likes idiots. So, it's the only possible thing I could conclude from that. But the truth is the symptoms are actually real, so the people who are reporting them can be shown to be physiologically suffering from them. There's just no actual physical cause. So that brings us on to the next point, which is don't be shitty about it. Psychogenic illness, of course, can occur quite easily in this day and age. Obviously, a lot of those factors we looked at before aren't really that common, but it can still happen. So the people who are experiencing it have real symptoms, so don't be a douchebag. Frank Waller wrote a very, very big book about the dancing plagues, and he sums it up very clearly. A few events, in my view, so clearly show the extraordinary potentials of the human mind. So basically, we're not as logical as we think we are. Physiology doesn't work as obviously as we think it does, and people can exhibit behaviours that aren't necessarily just irrational beliefs that can form into irrational physiology. Okay. There are some problems, though, with diagnosing the dancing plagues with mass psychogenic illness. So, it's hard to define mass psychogenic illness because it's kind of vague. There's a few different factors behind it, and it's in the realm of sociology and psychology, which often suffers these kinds of problems. But the other problem is that often the explanation of mass psychogenic illness is deployed when there's not necessarily any evidence showing that there's a physical cause. But if there's no physical cause, you shouldn't immediately jump to an explanation of mass psychogenic illness. You need evidence to use this theory, or this hypothesis. Okay, conclusion. Obviously there's a few factors that tend to lend themselves to this particular problem, and as we saw, that the problems are actually quite real. Irrationality, fear, anxiety, and scaremongering tend to be bad, so we don't want them. And you can reduce all of these things. You can have a media that tends to consider things on a much more rational basis rather than on how much they help feed those two things. You can educate the populace about possible toxicology, pathogens, technology, things like that. It reduces all of these things. Having some form of media that tends to reduce the segregation of groups, so people, even though they might be physically segregated, they're not psychologically segregated from the rest of society, like Twitter. Yeah, that's it.